Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as Oliver Dowden deputises for PMQs for the second week in a row, I'm going to explain how Sunak got the decision badly wrong when appointing the Deputy Prime Minister. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, although I am going to pick out a few questions and responses, I'm really going to be talking about how Sunak has made a dreadful error in selecting Oliver Dowden as his deputy. I've said before that PMQs with deputies is largely pointless at the best of times because the deputy has no seniority when it comes to policy decisions. It sounds like a really senior position, but it's not at all. It's nothing position. So it's impossible to really ask searching questions because all they do is say, well, that's nothing to do with me, which is true. Dowden doesn't really decide policy. You know, but he specifically, much more so than any other sort of deputy prime minister's questions, has been fairly awful every time he's deputised. But today was particular. I mean, he was battered by Angela Rayner in particular all over the place, but he had nothing. Rayner was mostly focusing on the mortgage crisis and child poverty in this session. It's incredible just how awful Dowden was when he must have had plenty of time to prepare. He didn't know what he was being asked, roughly anyway. In defending the government, he presented figures which were easy to shoot down. Dowden even went for the Jeremy Corbyn play. I know I'm biased, but I also appreciate good debating skills, regardless of the position being presented. There's no way that anyone, even remotely open-minded or neutral, could have seen that as a competent performance from Dowden. Last week, when he boasted of Sunak having faith in his deputy, most of the Tory MPs assembled behind him must have winced. If anything, it was way worse this week. At one point, Dowden said that the best way to lift people out of poverty was via raising the personal allowance. Okay, raising the personal allowance is a reasonable measure. It is a universal measure, but it does at least have a proportionally greater positive impact on people with lower wages. So you could go, okay, right. There's just one problem though, Dowden, mate. The government are not raising the personal allowance. They've frozen it. And their plans are to have it frozen for several years more yet. So by the time they put themselves out of their misery and call that general election, people will have had a sustained freeze in the personal allowance of several years. And when you take inflation into account, it actually means a real terms reduction in the personal allowance year on year. So if Dowden is claiming that raising the personal allowance is a good way to deal with poverty, and it's not a bad way, well, given that the government have frozen it, isn't he just pointing out that the government are deliberately ignoring what they consider to be a good way to deal with poverty? How is it possible for anyone to be this bad at politics? It's not even like I can just dismiss him as being thick. He's just thick. All too easy just to say that the thick as mints have risen to the top of the Tory party. And it's certainly true in the case of some. But like there was later on, in a response to a question from a backbencher, it was about Robert Jenrick painting over the cartoon murals. And I noticed he refused to support that decision. You know, the cartoons in the Children's Refugee Reception Centre. He refused to back it. Didn't condemn it either, but he refused to back it. So it's not like he's just going out and parroting lines and mindlessly defending every government decision. He showed enough awareness of the need to sidestep that particular issue. He knows it's a bad look. He's just incapable of defending the government. He knows how to avoid a bad situation, but he can't defend it. Even Tory client journalists were expressing their disbelief on Twitter about just how bad the performance was. I mean, he even lost the Sun. And this really is a sign that in many ways, Rishi Sunak is just as insecure as Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson famously assembled a cabinet of toadies, people who would not challenge him, as opposed to the best and the brightest who might actually have been able to deliver in government. His own ego was the priority. And it's like Sunak's done the same. He first reappointed Dominic Raab as his deputy, a man who would not outshine a black hole. Then he appointed Dowden. Now, was this really the best Sunak could come up with? I grant you, you look at the situation, you think, well, maybe it was. I mean, it's slim pickings, isn't it? When you consider what's on offer at the top of the Tory party. You know, you look at in terms of the next leadership contest. So when the general election happens, Sunak loses, he's probably going to bugger off to California. That's what people think. So there'll be another leadership contest. Penny Mordaunt is looking by far the most credible. Not necessarily the most likely to win, but the most credible. She is clearly marking out her territory as the non-loony candidate. Her destruction of Jacob Rees-Mogg the other night was both subtle and devastating. A masterclass in the art of passive aggression, really. And yet her main claim to fame was holding a sword in front of the king. That's who she is. That's the most credible option they've got after Sunak. You know, so imagine we've got this Tory leadership contest going on. Tory party members are going, who should we back? Who do we think? And they're not going to think of Mordaunt in terms of any policy she's championed, much less achieved. No, she's the lass with the sword. And she's the most credible option they have right now. It's a little bit grim. But Sunak had better options for his deputy. I mean, apart from anything else, Mordaunt herself would certainly have done a better job than Dowden. But I'd have said Michael Gove. Gove is probably one of the best the Tories have in a debate. He would certainly have offered a more robust defence of the government and is way less likely to have made unforced errors like that personal allowance gaffe. I also don't think Sunak would have needed to worry about Gove carrying out any acts of disloyalty. Of course, your deputy needs to be someone you can trust. He would have been able to do that. He would have been the obvious choice for deputy for me. So either Gove was offered and refused, or Sunak deliberately appointed someone so bad that it would just make the Prime Minister look good by comparison. Mind you, I will say that Rayner did have one ace up her sleeve that I think anyone would have struggled with. She noted that the last time PMQs was deputised 2 weeks in a row was 1996. Now, this was the year before the final... This was the final year of the last period of Tory government, the year before that general election that brought in a Labour government. And she noted that on that occasion, Labour's deputy at the time was John Prescott and he was facing Michael Heseltine.
Mr. Speaker, what matters is what people feel every single day at the moment who are going to work and can't afford their mortgage, can't afford their rent and can't afford their bills because of this Conservative government. There are 55,000 more children without a permanent address today compared to when they took office 13 years ago. We've gone from a Labour cabinet focused on tackling child poverty to Tory ministers who won't even admit the problem. Just like the question time in March 1996, they can only offer excuses and not answers. Lord John Prescott said to Lord Michael Heseltine that day, "How can the right honourable gentleman be so complacent in the face of sheer misery created by his government's policies? 27 years on, why are we asking the exact same thing?"
Superb way to bring it home. We are asking the same questions about Tory failures now as we were in 1996. You know, now just as then, there were excuses. But isn't it funny how the commonality is that we had an extended period of Tory government? We had NHS winter crises in the mid-90s, just as there are now. They've not happened on all the time since. They disappeared within a few years under Labour. Wasn't a thing. Wasn't a thing for years, the NHS winter crisis. There was just winter. Then the Tories came back, so too did the winter crises. So too did the child poverty. So too did the cost of living crisis. Because we don't really have a cost of living crisis, do we? You can have cost of living problems. All countries have cost of living problems. What we have is a cost of Tory crisis. Then Mhairi Black for the SNP focused on the mortgages herself in her questions, asking how bad the problem has to get before the government take it seriously. And this is also another thing about the Tories, and it was a theme echoed by Rayner as well when she talked about child poverty, saying that we did have a Labour government who made it a priority, but now we've got a Tory government who don't even acknowledge the problem. Because party politics is normally about differences of opinion about the best way to deal with a problem. But Conservatives don't even accept the problems. I mean, the first step to solving a problem is to understand it. If you won't even acknowledge it, well, you've no chance. You know, so Black is pointing out the fact that the government are not even accepting that this mortgage issue is a problem. You know, Rishi Sunak saying, hold your nerves. Like, hang on a minute. People need help, she's saying. Dowden banged on about inflation. The driver of higher mortgage rates is inflation, he said. No, it isn't. It's interest rates, you hapless cabbage. The government are pushing the Bank of England to raise interest rates in response to inflation, but it wouldn't be as necessary if they tried other things, such as attacking above inflation corporate profits instead of below inflation pay rises, or if they would just allow employers to fill their vacancies. With migrant labour, if there's none to be found in the UK. Black said that the latest forecast was for another £500 to be added onto mortgage payments on top of what's already gone on for 1 million households. She's trying to implore Dowden by saying, look, people need help now. Now. She may as well have been talking to a brick wall. The modus operandum of the Conservative Party has always been to squeeze ordinary people for as much as they can get away with. Now, from their point of view, the only mistake the Tories are making is that they have lost any sense of how much is too much. They are going to lose the election, and they're going to lose it badly, principally because they're squeezing too much. A more organised Labour Party can indeed displace them from power, but they need to win like 150 seats to get a decent majority. That is too big an ask. Too big an ask of any Labour leader within one parliamentary cycle. Record breaking. And yet Labour are on for even more than that. If Labour end up just gaining 150 seats, that'll be fine. That'll do dandy. Where we are now, that would be disappointing. The scale of the defeat will not just be down to Labour's focus and unity of purpose. That's all important. The scale of the defeat will be down to the Conservatives failing to understand they are going too far. Caused, no doubt, because they find themselves unwilling to face up to the facts, because the facts are that they have massively hampered any possibility we have to get out of this crisis because of Brexit, which they delivered and still insist on supporting. Their hopes that the free market will deliver has taken something of a blow when they destroyed free trade. The Tories are in a massive hole, and it has been caused by their policies, and yet it was still possible to present a more robust defence of the government than that. All they had to do was pretend that they acknowledged the problems. There's no point in denying problems that even the public can see. Politically, yes, you get away with denying problems that the public are not sure about. As soon as the public understand a problem, there's no sense in denying it. None at all. They should have acknowledged the problems that the public can see and then say they've got a plan to deal with them. That is enough to win a distressingly high number of voters over. But Dowden couldn't even do that. For Tories, I imagine it will be almost a relief to see Sunak back at the helm next week. It will be the day before he's likely to lose 3 by-elections in one day, but they will be able to console themselves with the thought, well, it could be worse. At least it's not Oliver Dowden again. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.